with you. So today's webinar, as I mentioned, will be going over some of our new research on what students, alumni, and employers think about for-profit colleges. We'll have some time at the end for Q&A with the researcher and with our president. And I also wanted to take a minute just to thank the Kresge Foundation who supported this project. The report, Profiting Higher Education, was just released this morning. It's available on our Public Agenda website, and my colleague Megan is also sharing the URL for the report with you right now in the chat box. Our presenters today will be Will Friedman, President of Public Agenda, and Carolyn Hagelskamp, our Director of Research. Before I turn it over to them, I just wanted to walk you through our GoToWebinar system in case you're not familiar with it. If that control panel on the upper right-hand side of your screen is bothering you, you can hit the orange arrow there to minimize it. And if you have any questions as you are listening to the presentation of the research, go ahead and type them into the chat box. Those will just go to those of us who are on this side of the curtain, and none of the other people attending the webinar will be able to see what you have to ask. And lastly, if you're having any audio trouble, you can go ahead and call us on the telephone instead of using your computer. We find that that has a bit of a better quality of audio. So you can just click on the telephone there on the control panel for you, and some dial-in information will appear after you select telephone. And now I'll turn it over to Will Friedman, our president, who will walk us through the context of the research. Will?
Thanks, Allison. Good morning, everyone. I'm just going to say a few words to set up the context for the presentation of the findings. The findings we'll be discussing with you today on the perceptions of for-profit colleges is the final piece of a larger research project that Public Agenda has undertaken with the generous support of the Kresge Foundation. You can see on your screen the 3 reports that we've produced through this grant, this being the 3rd. We decided to look at for-profits because they're growing fast, they're innovative, they're controversial, there are important policy decisions about them that are under consideration. That's exactly the sort of situation where we at Public Agenda like to try to shine some nonpartisan light on what's transpiring. And in this instance, we attempt to do this by exploring the experience and perceptions of current and former students, as well as employers. For-profits serve roughly 13% of the nation's undergraduate students. They've become especially popular in recent years with older students or adult students and lower income students. Enthusiasts applaud the for-profit sector for being innovative, for example, around the use of online education, and for being agile in their response to what the labor market needs and what many students want. Critics question the value of a credential from a for-profit degree, especially as tuitions are typically significantly higher at for-profits versus public institutions. They receive a great deal of federal financial aid, and they account for nearly 50% of federal student loan defaults. And their aggressive and often highly effective marketing practices also raise eyebrows. But if we hear a lot from experts and policy types about for-profit education, we have heard relatively little from students themselves or from employers. This project aims to fill in those blanks. The sorts of questions we came to this research with include: how do students and alumni for-profit colleges feel about their schools and the value of their education? Do they have distinct expectations, priorities, and needs compared with students who choose to study at a not-for-profit institution? Are prospective students effectively weighing their options before deciding to enroll? How do employers view for-profits compared with not-for-profit institutions as a source for job applicants? So those are some of the things we look to find out more about. And to hear about what we actually found, I'm going to turn it over to Carolyn Hagelskamp, our Director of Research, and she'll talk about some of the findings, after which we'll do our best to respond to your questions. Carolyn.
Thank you, Will. So yes, we conducted national representative survey studies of different kinds of students, among them for-profit undergraduates, people who are currently enrolled in for-profits. We also talked to alumni of for-profits, students who graduated between 2006 and 2013 with an undergraduate credential. And then we conducted a rather large study with adults who haven't gotten a degree yet, but who are saying that they are seriously considering going back to college or going to college for the first time within the next 2 years. And in that group, we also found a significant number of participants who were interested in a for-profit school. In addition to these student surveys, we conducted surveys with human resource professionals who hire for positions that require a post-secondary credential. Those were regionally representative surveys, and we recruited these professionals from the LA area, Philadelphia, Detroit, and the El Paso area in Texas. Also part of this big study was qualitative research, including focus groups with employers and adult prospective students. If anyone wants to know more about the methodology or specifics about the samples, I'm happy to answer any questions during the Q&A. The report also has a relatively extensive methodology section. So before I go into the findings, I do want to say that this study sought to take a look at the for-profit sector overall. So that doesn't mean that we don't recognize that for-profits vary in size, in focus, in mission, and in reputation. However, this kind of research is very early on. We don't know very much at all about students and employers' views from a representative quantitative perspective. So we believe that a generalized overview is justified and informative at this stage. Of course, in future studies, we hope to compare stakeholders' experiences across different kinds of for-profit schools. So with that said, I'm going to move to the findings of this study. First of all, we find that current students at for-profit schools and alumni of for-profits are pretty enthusiastic about their schools on a whole range of quality indicators. So we had pretty long surveys where we had the opportunity to ask not just one or two questions about their satisfaction, but give them whole batteries of quality indicators and asking students whether they felt their school succeeded or failed on these aspects. And we found that overwhelmingly current students and alumni say that their school gives students effective guidance so that students can stay on track, that they have teachers who they feel they care about them and they know how to teach, that their schools keep class size small, and that they are good opportunities for students to work in teams. We also found that, especially among the current students, they tend to value structured programs that lay out a path to graduation for them and help them make progress over the opportunity to be more exploratory in the first years of school and decide later on a major. And nearly all of our respondents say that their schools indeed allow them to make the kind of progress that they want to make. And all of these are very important quality indicators of higher education institutions. However, we also found significant concerns about the cost of college among for-profit undergraduates. So the majority consider their school expensive, and half say that they worry a lot about taking on too much debt. Especially among alumni, we saw particular skepticism of whether their degrees were worth it or not. And here this graph breaks it out. So we see basically that there's it's basically a third, more or less the divisions here. Roughly a third feel that their degree was not worth the time, cost, and effort. Another third says that it was well worth it, and then the remaining third says that it still remains to be seen. Kind of further supporting this kind of pattern of results, we find that a sizable minority, 38%, say that their schools did not prepare them well for their jobs or for jobs in general. And 44% feel that their schools, in hindsight, cared more about making money than educating students. So with that, I'm going to go to what we heard from prospective students. So these are adults without degrees who are considering going to school, and many of which are interested in for-profits. We know from federal data that for-profit students, compared to their counterparts at community colleges and public universities, are more likely to be from ethnic and racial minority backgrounds, have lower income, more likely to be female, and also older than their counterparts in the public schools. However, those demographics do not really tell us a whole lot about whether these students have distinct expectations or needs that perhaps for-profits can address better than public schools. So we digged a little deeper into this issue with our research, and we found that adults without degrees who are considering enrolling in a for-profit institution are indeed more likely to also say that they are drawn to schools that offer online classes and accelerated degrees. So that's in line with kind of the assumptions that are around of students who go to for-profits. We also find that they're more likely to say that they would be more interested in a school if they knew that that school offered personal guidance from career counselors, from financial aid advisors and tutors, and and if they knew that the school had opportunities for practical work-related experiences. You see that here on the graph. The purple ones are the ones that are prospective students interested in for-profits, and the green bars are prospective students who do not, who are only interested in public or not-for-profit schools. So of course we don't really know whether these being interested in a for-profit and preferring these kind of characteristics in your schools, whether there are any causal relationships between this the two these are associations at this point. However, they do raise the question of whether for-profits may indeed be not only better at advertising these characteristics, but actually meeting them, and whether or not these students are perhaps better served at these schools or less expensive public school. So with that, I'm turning to what we learned about employers and their views on for-profits vis-a-vis various other types of schools. And I want to present kind of two main findings here. So first, we found that employers know comparatively little about the for-profit colleges in their metropolitan areas. And we found that by giving each employer respondent randomly selected names of specific schools in their area, and we asked them to rate these schools in terms of the quality of training and education they provide. And whenever we gave the respondent the name of a specific local for-profit or even a national chain online for-profit, employers were much more likely to say that they didn't have an opinion or they didn't know or hadn't heard about the school than they were when we gave them the name of a specific community college or a non-for-profit school in their area. So they typically had opinions on the public schools. However, among those who did rate their for-profits, we found that the majority held pretty positive experiences. So we, for example, 70% rate them highly in terms of the education and training they provide. However, they rate the public institutions even more highly. And that's a pattern that we saw again when we kind of addressed that question of the comparative question from another angle. So after we had asked these questions, we then moved on and gave each employer a definition of a for-profit school. And basically we said that for-profits are a growing number of higher education institutions that operate as profit-making businesses. And we explained that many for-profits are small private vocational schools and that some are large national enterprises. And then each respondent was given a random 3 names of the country's largest for-profits as kind of a trigger to make him think about the for-profit sector. So after they'd been given this definition, we then asked respondents to compare for-profits to community colleges and 4-year public institutions respectively on 3 quality indicators, and you see them here on the slide. So we asked about how well these schools are doing comparatively, teaching important knowledge and skills, preparing students to work at your company, and providing professional development opportunities. And in general, we found that about half of employers don't see any differences. They will answer about the same, don't see differences. The other half, however, will see public institutions as superior. And this is especially true when they compare for-profits to 4-year public schools. So here on the right-hand side, you see, for example, you see that 46% say they see no difference between for-profits in general and public institutions in general when it comes to rating them and how well they prepare students to work at their company. However, on the other hand, we see 41% who rate public institutions significantly better, and hardly anyone who would think that for-profits are higher in that regard. Having spoken about for-profit students and employers' views on for-profit institutions, we're now turning to a number of quite surprising findings that suggest that for-profit students are not really the type of comparative shoppers that many education leaders would like them to be. So we know that education leaders, the federal government, philanthropy are investing increasing time and efforts right now to make comparative information about colleges more easily accessible and also more engaging so that students make more informed and presumably better decisions about their education. However, I'm going to present a few findings here from our research that suggest that much of this information is not reaching these kind of students at this point at least. For example, first of all, we found that just the word for-profit college, which is so prominent in leaders' conversations about them and in news headlines, is a concept, a term that is largely unknown about among even the students who attend these schools. So basically half of our prospective students, half of our current students, and 40% of our alumni say that absolutely nothing comes to mind when they hear the word for-profit college. And then also we find that 2/3, 65% of for-profit undergraduates are unsure whether their school is for-profit or not when we ask them. And then 12% believe it is not for-profit. Furthermore, we found that only a minority of these students consider more than one school before they enroll at their school. So here we asked, did you seriously consider another school before enrolling at the school that you're currently attending? And just 4 in 10 undergraduates say that they did so. And then furthermore, rarely do these students compare for-profits with not-for-profit institutions. So for most it is either or. That means we found only 20% of current undergraduates who list a not-for-profit school as a school they had also looked into, seriously considered. And when we did a companion study with community college students, and we found a very similar pattern. Most of them don't actually look at other schools before enrolling at the community college they enrolled in. And here it was only 6% who looked at a for-profit school. So it kind of suggests that there's, the market that looks just at for-profit schools, and then there's the market who just looks at public schools. So education leaders often say that for-profits are better at reaching their students through advertising and also sometimes said aggressive recruiting, especially when ads and recruiters promote practical degree programs and hands-on help with financial aid application, study skills, and job searches. Our research provides some support to these assumptions because we found that among the group of prospective adult students, those who list the for-profit as a school they're considering enrolling at are also more likely to say that they learned about schools from advertisement and recruiters than are adults who are only listing non-for-profit schools that they're interested in. And again, here you see that in the slides. We asked, did you learn about these sources from, did you learn anything about college from these sources? And the purple are the people who are interested in for-profits, and the green are the people who are not, only interested in private or not-for-profit schools. Last but not least, we find that alumni feel very strongly that alumni of for-profits feel very strongly that prospective students should be paying more attention to some critical information about colleges, such as a school's average student debt or information about the types of jobs and salaries students get, and they should pay attention to that before they actually decide which school to go to. So these are some of the key pieces of information that education leaders are making available or trying to make available right now. But we also know from our survey that current undergraduates typically don't know much about these statistics when it comes to their school, and that even prospective students don't necessarily take them to think that they're essential. So, here's only 61% of current students don't know how much debt the average student from their school graduates with, and just 51%, just half of our prospective students think that this information is at all essential. So there's a clear divide between what education or even for-profit alumni think is important versus what prospective students and current students know and find essential. Finally, I recommend that everyone who's looking to help prospective students make more informed decisions about college should check out, and that's whether, decisions whether they're going to a public or non-for-profit school or for-profit school, community college, whichever, should check out the student engagement recommendations that we published in our previous report, Is College Worth It for Me? And with that, I will hand it back over to Alison Rislow, who's going to moderate the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Carolyn and Will. So now we'll be opening it up to questions. And as you see there on the screen in front of you, you have a choice here. You can either type your question into the chat box. And again, the other folks who are on this call, other than those of us who are doing the presenting, will not see your question in case you want to be anonymous. Or you can also, if you're on a telephone especially, or you know that the microphone on your computer works very well, you can also tap that icon, little hand icon on the control panel, and that indicates that you're raising your hand. And at that point, I will unmute you, let you know, call your name to let you know that you are unmuted, and then you can go ahead and ask us your question. In the meantime, we have had a couple of questions come in during the presentation, so we'll handle those first. First, you say that many students aren't considering more than one school. What do you think can be done to make students consider a broader range of choices?
So this is something that we discussed at length in our previous report. Well, a lot of information is out there, and I think the message from our research is that it's not reaching the students that we want it to reach. So there's definitely a message here to make the information maybe put it in places where students are actually likely to see it. For example, we found that a lot of the websites that provide comparative information on colleges do not come up in Google searches on colleges and degrees. They come up maybe on the second or third page where nobody's looking anymore. And also that one should never forget that there needs to be much more of an opportunity for prospective students to engage with the information, either with peers or with knowledgeable advisors or more objective experts, where they have an opportunity to understand what an average graduation rate or an average debt rate of a school may actually mean to them, because this is not obvious information. So yeah, we discussed that there needs to be more kind of online and offline engagement happening.
Thanks, Carolyn. I have another question here. Among the students who did compare different institutions when choosing a college, did you look at which variables or factors they compared?
Yeah, those are so few that we really couldn't, that would like break down to literally 20 people. So we didn't do a statistical analysis, we weren't able to do a statistical analysis on that.
Thanks. Sorry for the delay. I'm just trying to switch between a few things here on the control panel. Another question regarding employers preferring four-year public institutions over for-profit. Given that the majority of employers are graduates of four-year public institutions, how do we accurately measure this preference?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. We have the same, we discussed the same situation when we published our brief on online education, where employers are still quite skeptical of online degree programs, and there might be a thing that they haven't actually gone through them, they have less experience with them. It's definitely an issue. We did ask to report the employers where they graduated from. But that comes with all sorts of things that employers have to think about. I think personal experience always makes a difference. Will, what do you think?
So I think it's probably relevant what employers' views are on the topic, whatever the reasons behind it. But I do think it's interesting to look at what the reasons behind it might be. And I think we all recognize that this is a rapidly changing picture, that with things like online education and for-profit institutions in the higher ed landscape. It's a fast-moving, rapidly transforming situation, and we expect people's views to change based on a number of different, as they experience things over time. I think ultimately business is going to respond to what's working for their bottom line. So it's conceivable that there's a natural sort of comfort zone with institutions that people are more familiar with. I certainly think that if they see the kinds of job candidates and applicants that they're looking for, that's really what's going to prove out in the long run.
I just want to say one more thing actually to the previous question about what are they comparing their schools on, the ones that actually do make comparisons. And even though we can't actually, we can't break it down to that small of a sample, our previous report does talk at length about the prospective students' priorities in general. And I recommend that people look at that. There's a long list that clearly shows that affordability and teacher quality are among the top priorities that prospective students are looking for. Oh, that report is college is worth it. It's college worth it for me.
Thanks, Carolyn. And we'll send out, in the follow-up to the webinar, I'll send out not only links to this current Profiting Higher Education report, but also to the other 2 reports in this series, including the one that looks at what adult prospective students are thinking about and doing as they are applying to colleges. Our next question here, is it possible that students that attended traditional schools would have had similar answers? Not all traditional institutions have clear pathways to graduation, and not all graduates of 4-year institutions feel properly prepared for the workforce. Interesting question, I think one that we can speak to based on our other work in the field.
Yeah, it's kind of 2 questions. One is the question whether graduates in general are kind of skeptical about the value of their degrees. And there's actually surprisingly little good research on that. And so in our study, we only looked at for-profit alumni, so we didn't have a direct comparison group. And some other research that's out there does show that graduates, especially these days, are not necessarily all happy with or feel that it was worth it getting their degrees given the job market. And the research that we found is pretty mixed, so that some suggest that for-profits graduates tend to be even more skeptical in general than compared to other graduates, and some other studies suggest that four-year public university graduates are equally skeptical as the alumni that we interviewed for our studies. So there's more research to be done on that, definitely, and that it's also likely to change depending on swings in the economy and things like that.
Our research does have a comparison group with current community college students, comparing them to current for-profit undergraduates. And it does show that current community college students are less anxious about the cost of their education compared to current for-profit students. So just another indicator, but we do agree that a sample of public alumni would be a good comparison point. We'd hope to do that at some point.
Thanks. Next question, do you think that there is a bias that still exists about for-profit institutions so that employers' answers may be based on false information or on a lack of proper information?
I mean, based on our research, it seems that there's less of a bias than in not really knowing. So we also did focus groups, and we also find that the word for-profit is not a commonly known term among employers either, and they don't really know or think about the categories in the same way that the Department of Education does. So they do have ideas about schools that advertise a lot on TV, and we definitely heard in our focus groups some criticism about certain TV ads, and that didn't really, employers didn't appreciate so much. But I didn't get the sense that they had a bias against the sector as a whole, because they weren't really thinking about the sector as a whole in the same way that experts do.
Thanks. Next question. There are different subsets of surveys here, including students, alumni, and human resources managers / employers. Which subset do you think is the most logical for a deeper dive? In other words, which group of employers here is there the greatest potential for greater understanding? Do we have a priority, or would we suggest a priority in terms of subsets of employers that it would be smart to look at for more information?
Subset of employers or other students.
Or other samples. Specifically employers?
Oh, no, it wasn't specifically employers. Thank you.
I think there's a lot of we know generally more about what employers think about higher education. There's more work out there than there is on student samples and alumni samples. So I think that's definitely a group that we should give more voice to. These studies are incredibly time intensive and resource intensive. These it's hard to reach representative samples of the students groups and alumni, especially if you break it down to a specific kind of education sector. I think that's one of the reasons they're so rare. It's also a reason why our samples are comparatively small. So I would love to do more work with the current students and the alumni, just because we know a lot less about them.
And current students and alumni from different sectors or different kinds of schools, we think would be quite interesting.
Another question here, did the study consider the relationship between employer perceptions of prospective employees' educational background versus job readiness? Which, if either of these, do employers value more?
Employers will tell you that it's experience that matters the most. That we heard that again and again, both in our focus groups and the survey. However, they will also say that by the time that they get CVs onto their desk, they will have, applications will have been weeded out for not having the right educational credentials. So there's a little bit of a ambiguity there. And yeah, in terms of what was basically experience was definitely, at least when you ask employers, that would trump the educational background. What was interesting in our employer survey also, it's actually not published in the report because it's a little bit of a different topic, but you see a lot of surveys when you ask employers about the quality of job applicants that they get, that they rate them relatively low. But if you, in our survey, we asked them about the qualities of their employees, so the people that they actually ended up hiring, which arguably they can maybe evaluate a little bit better than just their applicants. They rated them pretty highly on key job skills in our survey.
Thanks, Carolyn. Also, just a reminder, if you wanted to hear someone else's voice other than ours and ask your question on the telephone, feel free to raise your hand. Another question here. The two items that for-profit colleges are thought to do better than nonprofit or public colleges are, one, the calendar, as in they're not bound by a traditional semester system, and two, marketing. Privates are in the business of building and managing a brand. Are there key lessons or takeaways for the nonprofit or public colleges from this report?
Well, there probably are. We certainly find that you heard Carolyn talk about the finding of for-profit students not considering other kinds of schools and how the market is sort of bifurcated. So people aren't being reached by information about sectors that they haven't somehow heard about or been attracted to immediately. So there's probably lessons to be learned about how to reach students effectively, or prospective students.
Another question. Had all of the employers in the study hired graduates from for-profit schools? If not, do you feel that would have made a difference in their response?
No, not everybody had, and I think we do have that information. So we had, and then actually we asked, have you ever hired somebody from a for-profit school? And perhaps not surprisingly, a good number said they didn't know. Perhaps it could have made a difference if they knew they had hired somebody from a for-profit school. I think that's a bit of again an empirical question. Both given that they don't actually necessarily know that a school is for profit, or what they have a kind of a different idea of the sector than education leaders. So this needs to, we need more research on that.
Okay, another question here. Did your research compare general entrance requirements between for-profit and not-for-profit schools?
So that's a question of whether we were able to compare within the sector, like the students who are in one kind of school and another kind of school, which, that's how.
Maureen, if that is something different from what you had in mind, what Carolyn just said there, let us know. But the question as I have it in front of me is, did your research compare general entrance requirements between for-profit and not-for-profit schools?
In general, we were not able to break our samples down even more than because they are comparatively small, 200 and 250. So we looked more kind of eyeballing example. We looked at, bigger for-profits and smaller for-profits, 2-year versus less than 2-year versus 4-year for-profits. But and I think this question goes in a similar direction where we weren't able to break down our samples even further at this point, just because they, then they get a little too small to give reliable results.
Are these small samples of around 200 students and about 250 alumni enough to make representative conclusions about the for-profit students and alumni across the sector?
Yeah, so these samples are comparatively small to the kind of public opinion research we typically do, and that's basically because they're very expensive to get and hard to reach. However, we employed state-of-the-art methodologies that allow us, to the best of our knowledge, to conclude that these are, given the advantages and limitations of these methodologies, that these are representative samples. And then we report a margin of error in the report, and within that margin of error, I think we can have a reasonable, we can be reasonably confident about our results. Of course, any more data on this would make the results more reliable.
Thanks, Carolyn. And someone here just wanted a repeat of the stat. What % of students at, oh, no, this is a different stat. What % of students at nonprofit schools thought that their degree was too expensive for the value received? We touched on this a little bit, but Carolyn, if you wanted to repeat where the research with not-for-profit students or alumni lays in that.
Right. So we have, I guess I have two answers to that. We did ask the current students whether they felt their school was expensive, and I don't have the percentage in front of me, but the majority of current for-profit students feel that their school is expensive, while I think it was less than 20% of community college students who said the same about their school. So a lot less worry about costs in the community college sample. Then we asked about the value of the education. So what did it actually give you in the labor market? Was it worth it? We asked that only of alumni because they actually have that kind of experience, while the current students, they hadn't actually gotten their degree yet. And then we don't have our own comparison data to that, but there's, I think on page 21 in the report, we do report in a side box other data that suggests, federal government data suggests that, people who have ever attended a for-profit are somewhat more skeptical about the value of their degree than others. That's just one data point. And then there's, I think we report a McKinsey study that looks at largely public sector graduates and finds that a lot of them are quite skeptical about the value of their degree. So again, those are inconclusive results across different studies, and clearly more if we're interested in comparing students across different sectors on this question, then there's definitely room for more research.
Thanks, Carolyn. Another question here, did you look at the length of time to graduation for alumni who were concerned about debt? I know this isn't something that we looked at in the study, but if you wanted to say anything about it, some students can move through accelerated programs more rapidly than others. Could this have an effect on the responses?
It's a good question. We did not look at that. We only know when they graduated, so it hadn't been, had been within the last 8 years. But we didn't look at how long it took them.
Another question here, employers value experience in for-profit schools, seem to market themselves as better at job preparation. If this is accurate, what can you say about the apparent disconnect between what employers say they value and who they hire?
I don't know if there's a disconnect between who they hire and what they value. I'm sure they hire the people that they think have the most experience. wherever they got it from, whether that's through a more vocational degree or practical work experience while you study, or actually having had a job before. So I'm not sure that there is necessarily a disconnect.
Was there anything that you wanted to say about other questions that this data raises for future research?
Well, I hope we can do more, more of this kind of research. I think I was surprised and intrigued by many of the findings. I don't think they are predictable, and it has been, a challenge and a great pleasure doing this work, and it just intrigued me to do more of it and to understand these views even better.
So I would add that examining how alumni experience or look back on their education over time and trying to weed out this question of to what extent it has to do with the current state of the economy versus other factors would be helpful. I think that there's a lot more work to do around prospective students and what will help them understand their options more fully. There's a whole stream of work around differentiating the for-profit sector as well as differentiating the not-for-profit sector more fully, as opposed to the broad strokes view that we took here, which we think was a great starting point for understanding the sector and understanding how the majority of students in the sector right now are experiencing things. But there's a number of different actors doing very different things in that sector as well, and teasing that apart, I think, could be very revealing.
Do you think that students who are going to for-profits could be served as well by public institutions, or is there something they're getting at the for-profits that they couldn't find elsewhere?
Well, that's a good question, and I think it's very similar to the question we pose in our considerations and questions section at the end of the report. And again, I can only say that we need definitely more research on that, and that's really interesting research.
And that research will probably be most powerful to the extent that we include the current student experience, but then extend beyond graduation and have that retrospective view as well as workforce outcomes and things like that. We do find a good deal of satisfaction in both sectors on a number of important variables. And so, there wasn't a dramatic difference, but there was quite a significant satisfaction on important areas, and then some differences, and teasing those apart further and understanding them sort of longitudinally, I think, could be illuminating and have a lot of policy implications.
And related, I think someone in the audience just wanted to make the comment that, or the question that frequency of marketing is also something that can be looked at, right?
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Pardon me as I'm scrolling through these questions here. The other thing that makes a difference is the accessibility of classes when working adults can attend. Karen wanted to make that comment, as well as the clear pathway to graduation makes a huge difference. A couple of comments from our audience.
Yes, definitely. That's very true. And I think it's something that many schools are trying to figure out.
For-profits and not-for-profits alike are working on that piece of the puzzle.
Karen also made the comment, I am a product of traditional, non-traditional, and for-profit sectors, and I would say yes to that question. Sorry, Karen, I just wasn't sure what question you were referring to, so if you wanted to just add another note in the question box so we can understand what you were commenting on there. It looks like we're reaching the end of our questions here. I'll just leave a few more minutes in case anyone is typing anything last minute that they'd like to ask us. And just note that if you missed any hyperlinks or were interested in the other reports associated with this research, I will be sure to email everyone who attended the webinar later on today with links to all 3 of those reports: Profiting Higher Education, Is College Worth It for Me, and Not Yet Sold, which looks at online education specifically. If you have any questions, or if I happen to overlook your question, there were a bunch that came in the beginning. If you have any questions that we didn't answer, please feel free to email either me, Allison, or Carolyn, our Director of Research. Well, our email addresses are not on the slide, but you can reach me at arizzolo@publicagenda.org, and you can reach both of us on our website there, www.publicagenda.org, and we'll be happy to answer those questions for you. If there are any remaining questions, just send them in now. But again, I want to thank you for your time. This webinar was recorded, so I'll also be sending you a link to that recording when that link is live if you wanted to share that with any colleagues or watch it again. Will, Carolyn, any final comments that you wanted to share?
No, just thank you for listening. We look forward to hearing any further questions that you might have on the research or suggesting further work that we might do. Evidently a question is coming in, Allison?
One more question here. This webinar system does not make it easy to read questions. Sorry for all these delays. In the link you provided, it lists the private college sample as the list included the University of Phoenix, ITT Technical Institute, Ashford University, DeVry University, Kaplan University, the Art Institutes, Strayer University, American Public University, Walden, Everest, Grand Canyon, and Capella University. Is that accurate? There is a private school named American Public University.
Yes, there's a private school. There's a private school that's named. Yeah. Yeah, there's a for-profit school named American Public University. That list comes from the is not the list of students that that doesn't reflect the participants of our study. It's a lot of participants came from these schools, but a lot of participants also came from a lot of other schools, including small schools. That list is the list from which we drew random names when we gave employers a definition of for-profit colleges, and each got 3 random names just to trigger some kind of recognition for them. And that's the list we used, the 12 largest for-profits in the country.
Great, thank you very much. That is definitely a strange name for a for-profit university. Well, thank you, Carolyn and Will, and thank you to everyone who joined us on today's webinar. Look for an email from me with any necessary links afterwards, and thank you again. Have a great day.